Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Kellie Neirynck, the Senior Director of Products and Services with the Small Business Association of Michigan. And just a note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will post it on our website at sbam.org and send you an email to the link so that you can refer to it later, or if you'd like to share it with any team members, you'll have the ability to do that. You are currently muted, but we encourage you to submit any questions through the Q&A or chat feature, and we'll answer them as we go along. So the Small Business Association of Michigan is a statewide organization, and we serve businesses with fewer than 500 employees across all industry types. And our tools help our members attract and retain talent, manage employee benefit programs, offer discounts on most things that you're already buying, and help you stay compliant. Our work at the Capitol helps ensure that Michigan is a great place to own and operate a small business. We have 5 membership levels, providing a variety of options to best fit your needs. So please, I invite you to visit our website and learn more about all of the products and services that are available to you. So now more than ever, small businesses need to be protected from cyber attacks. Yet many of our members find cyber solutions to be expensive, complicated, and time-consuming. And that's where our approved partner, SensCy, comes into play. SensCy simplifies cybersecurity for you and provides deliverables that identify your cybersecurity vulnerabilities and reduce your risk and ensure that you can recover should an attack occur. SensCy hosts this webinar series that educate you on important topics related to small business cybersecurity. And today's webinar will review the ins and outs of a cyber incident response plan and why your small business should have one in place. Presenting today is SensCy's Chief Technology Officer, Dave Kelly. And so with no further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Dave.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome everyone. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today to talk about a really important part of cybersecurity that oftentimes gets overlooked when we're planning our building our cyber health plans and making sure that we're prepared should an incident occur. Oftentimes when we think about a cyber incident, we really think about, well, I'm going to have things go down and how much is going to cost me to bring those things back up. But the reality is what we see most of the time is that there's a significant business disruption that comes from a cyber incident. And that's why the cyber incident response plan is really important. When we look at, so I'm going to show you just some statistics. The duration of downtime from a cyber incident between 2020 and 2021, you can see the statistics here, 15 to 20 days. Those are things that we don't really consider from a cyber incident, that, hey, our business might be down and it's going to impact other parts of our business beyond just the incident that we're dealing with. Ransomware attacks, this is a statistic from IBM. In 2022, the average downtime was 16.2 days. So one thing that a cybersecurity incident response plan can do for you is really help you respond efficiently to reduce these downtimes. That's what we're truly after with a good, well thought out plan. If we look at the cost of lost business, you can see the average total cost of a data breach there from last year is 1.52 million. 40% of that is due to lost business and downtime. Looking at the average breach life cycle of 280 days, that's a little bit of a different statistic. That's looking at things like how long before we're totally out of the woods from this incident, right? So, it took us X amount of days to get our systems back up and running, but now we have to make notifications to employees, to vendors. Do we have to buy credit monitoring? How long do we have to do that? Are there any regulatory compliance things we have to go through because of this incident? So it can stick with you for a while. And that's one of the reasons why a really well thought out cyber incident response plan can reduce a lot of these things and get you back up and running much more quickly. There's also revenue loss associated with a data breach, and this is from a CNBC study. It basically says that 29% of companies that experience a cyber attack lose revenue, and 38% of those lose 20% or more. So these are kind of the hidden costs of a cyber incident that we don't immediately consider. So let's transition right into what are we talking about when we're talking about a cyber incident response plan. You can really think of it as a written guide that provides you step-by-step instructions on what to do. Remember, if our systems go down and we have a serious cyber incident and we're going to be in crisis mode, and the time to think about what to do isn't when we're in the middle of the crisis, right? We need to have something that helps guide us through the crisis. And all of that is put together before the incident, right? So we build the plan, we assign folks into roles, and we know what we're supposed to do if we have an incident. So that way, during the incident, we can activate the plan and just follow the steps, right? So we don't have to, under stress, think about, okay, am I doing this? What should come first? What should come second? We can just follow the script and ensure that we act as quickly as possible. And the last thing that should be in an incident response plan is after action, right? So we need to have a script to follow. Okay, we've gotten through this. What loose ends do we have? And what do we need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen to us again? So a good plan will guide you through before, during, and after the incident. You can really think of it sort of as a roadmap of actions and responsibilities necessary to ensure we can recover as fast as possible, right, from this incident and not have that protracted downtime that we saw in the previous slide. One other thing to note that a cybersecurity incident response plan is really a component of either a business continuity plan or a disaster recovery plan. So if you have plans in place that talk about, okay, what do we do if we have a power outage? What do we do if we have, a natural disaster? A cybersecurity incident response plan should be included in that overall planning if you already have some planning in place. But it doesn't replace those because those are designed for different types of incidents. All right, that puts us to our first poll question. So we're going to ask you a quick poll question, and it's basically, does your business have a cybersecurity incident response plan? And we'll give everybody a few minutes to vote. All right, I see no. I see some people are still working on it. Give everybody a few more minutes. There is some upfront work in doing these, but if you have a good one in place, it really will provide you that step-by-step instruction. And it's really sort of fill in the blanks and, assign people into roles and then just revisit it biannually or annually to make sure that it's still up to date. All right. Still some answers coming in. And whenever we're ready, we can show the results. All right. Looks like 67% do not have one and 33% are currently working on one. So great for the people who are currently working on one. All right. Okay. I got frozen here. Hold on one second. Apologies. Let me go back. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about why is a cyber incident response plan important. So I mentioned this earlier, but an efficient response will equal efficient recovery, and it'll reduce our downtime and reduce some of the other expenses that we could incur from a protracted situation. It reduces the business disruption. It reduces our reputational risk with clients, right? So the more time that we're down, obviously, the more impact that has on our clients, and then it also impacts our reputation, because we don't seem like we were prepared to deal with this particular situation. And lastly, an efficient response really builds trust with our partners, our supply chain, and our employees. So if we have a good incident response plan, we're following those steps step by step, people are going to notice that, right? The people that we partner with, people in our supply chain, they're going to notice that, hey, these guys had this covered, they responded quickly, and they got their systems back up and running, and that just builds confidence across our business ecosystem, including with our employees. However, in order to have an efficient response, we really need to have engaged leadership. So the business owners or leaders must be involved in the development of the plan. There are, not only because you need to be aware that it exists and need to know how to activate it, but also what we found is when the leadership's involved, the employees are much more confident in their roles and how to act when the incident happens. We need to assign key personnel in advance, right? We need to know if we do have an incident, for example, who's the incident response manager, who's going to be responsible for notifying our employees and making other notifications. So those roles must be set out in advance and included in the plan. So if we have something happen, everybody knows what they're supposed to do. And authority must be given for early decisions. This is really important. It's very, very important for us to mitigate this situation as fast as possible, right? And what do I mean by that? Let's say you're a manufacturing company, you notice something happening on the floor. We have maybe an older system that can't be patched anymore, and that's where the breach happens, or that's where the ransomware starts to exist, right? Somebody has to have authority to shut down systems immediately without having to pick up the phone and get a hold of the business owner or find somebody else, right? Because as we wait for notifications to be made, that virus or that situation can spread throughout all of our systems. And now, where we may have had just a small problem on the manufacturing floor, now we've got a problem with our payroll, our HR systems, our email, and everything else, right? So it's very important that we have these early discussions and we know who has authority to make a decision to shut us down, even if it's temporarily, just to make sure that this thing doesn't spread throughout the throughout the ecosystem. And it's really important that we do that right out of the gate. So another reason why this is important is we're seeing now 43% of cyber attacks are now targeting small businesses. One reason for that is that larger companies have now invested a lot of money in cybersecurity personnel, cybersecurity resources, tools, like all of these things, right? So us in the smaller business community have become kind of a lower hanging fruit, and now we're starting to see an increase in attacks against our smaller businesses. We've surveyed over 100 small and medium-sized organizations, and 69% of them do not have an incident response plan. So I think that statistic nationwide is around 65%, so right in the same ballpark with a bit of a smaller sample size. Okay, what should be included in this plan? So the first thing I would say that needs to be included is we really need to empower our business owners and leaders to ask the right questions, right? Most business owners are not cybersecurity experts. Cybersecurity lingo and terminology and acronyms can be super confusing, right? And when someone's reporting to you, you may not even understand, like, what are you talking about, right? So a good cybersecurity incident response plan will empower the business leaders to ask the right questions, right? And simplify that for the business leaders. And it really comes in 3 phases. During the incident, and I won't go through every single one of these in detail, but I'll talk about a few of them. During the incident, are we keeping logs, right? We're going to have to manually do things on paper, right? Because our systems will be down. And it's going to be really important that we're documenting things in a log, because when it comes time to do the remediation, if we haven't documented things, your remediation costs are going to be much greater, because the people who come in to do the remediation aren't going to have the historical information that they need, and they're going to have to find it, and it's going to take them much longer to bring you back up. And it's also potentially going to keep you down longer and increase the costs. So we need to understand what type of attack is this, right? And a good response plan will have types of attacks and definitions and kind of outcomes, so business owners can know, okay, this is a ransomware, And that's different than, you know, a DDoS attack, for example, distributed denial of service attack. So it'll have those definitions and explain to you what those things are. What systems are being impacted, right? Is this contained to just my manufacturing floor, my previous example, or has it spread out to my HR systems? How is it disrupting the business? What stakeholders are impacted? And then, of course, simple things like, when was it first reported and who reported it? That'll be really important later for your forensics work, when you have somebody come out to help you get back up and running. And then who do we need to notify? So the recovery phase, right? We need to be asking questions during the recovery phase. So we've got all of our questions answered. The incident response plans guided us through it. Now we're in our recovery phase. We need to start asking different questions, right? What was the vulnerability that caused this incident? Because we need to know how to fix it later, right? How widespread was the damage? What are the recovery steps? Really important, right? A good incident response plan will sort of lay out what the recovery steps should be. So then you can look at that, read through that, and make sure you're doing the proper things to make sure that when you don't get back up and running, we have this incident happen all over again. Are we documenting recovery steps and expenses incurred? This is really important if you have cyber insurance, because you'll need to be able to document those expenses when you make a claim. After the fact, right? What mitigation measures were instituted to prevent a recurrence of this incident, right? We want to make sure that this doesn't happen to us again. So we need to be asking about, what have we done to ensure this doesn't happen again? Do we need new policies or procedures or anything, you know, to help us prevent this from happening again? During our response, what worked, what didn't work, right? So we can improve our incident response plan, or maybe put somebody else in a different role. Maybe we had the wrong person in a role. Any communication recommendations? And then finally, do we need to adjust our budget, right? For any recommendations or changes that came out of this incident. So this is just a high level example of some of the questions that should be asked during the 3 phases of a cybersecurity incident. And a good response plan will have more in there and really guide you through what to ask and what information to get at what point during the event. All right, internal communications. I think especially since the pandemic, we've all become super reliant on these things. Matter of fact, we're doing this webinar on Zoom right now. But when you have an incident, all of these things will be down. So whether the cybersecurity incident itself took them all down, or we shut them down to prevent the spread of the incident, either way, we're not going to be able to communicate internally the way that we expect to communicate, right? So we need to have something in the plan that helps us and guides us through, hey, how are we going to talk to each other and mitigate this, manage this crisis, right? So these are just a few very high level examples of what can be included in a plan. You know, we could set up something as simple as a text message group, and we know from the cybersecurity incident response plan who all the key members are who are going to be involved in various roles, either through notification or HR or the response itself, and legal potentially. So we can get those folks into a simple SMS group chat and talk that way. We can establish some free Gmail accounts and then notify key stakeholders via text message, hey, join this group. Or if we're concerned about having something encrypted and not using free services, we can use an end-to-end encryption tool like Signal, ask the members to download that app on their mobile devices, and we can communicate in an encrypted way until we get through this incident and get our normal communications back up and running. So those are just 3 examples. There's lots of other ways to do this, but something to think about, right? How are we going to talk to each other? Because if we have to spend a bunch of time figuring out how to get a hold of each other, that's more time that is actual downtime and leads to additional expenses. External communications, right? What do we say? We have a lot of potentially impacted stakeholders. We have our employees, and the employees could be potentially victims if employee data was stolen, but also we might have various employees who can't work and other employees who can work, right? So we need to make sure that the plan identifies what do we say to employees and what employees do we have and what roles that we need to communicate with. Customers, an obvious one, partners, vendors, our supply chain, right? We need to take a look at this early on, who's impacted, And what do we say to them? And then lastly, potentially our investors, right? They could be impacted. A good incident response plan will have sample communications like the one I have here that kind of guide you on, okay, here's what we should say to this particular group, to our employees. Here's what we should say to our customers. Here's what we should say, maybe partners, vendors, and supply chain are all in that same group, right? And here's what we might want to say to our investors. Because when you're in the middle of this crisis, trying to put all of this stuff together, the more delay there is on communication, the more sort of speculation happens from people, and they start to fear the worst, that this incident might be worse than it is, when in reality, we're just scrambling to do this communication. So if you have a template pre-built for each of these situations in your plan, you can pull it up and give it a quick legal review. We recommend, that, legal reviews it and then send it out, right? Which will dramatically increase the speed with which you're able to recover from that sort of reputational risk. All right. I went through that very quickly because this is only a 30-minute webinar, and I really wanted to leave time if anybody has any questions. But before I do that, I do want to say we're offering something to everybody who's on this webinar. SensCy has what we call the SensCy score, which is like a FICO score for your cyber health, right? It's a 30-minute maximum meeting. We're offering it free right now to anybody who attends on the webinar. We'll go through and do a cyber health evaluation, and incident response and incident response planning is part of good cyber health. So we need to first identify, we need to be able to detect, we need to be able to protect, and then we need to be able to respond and recover. Those are the components of having a good cyber hygiene. And obviously an incident response plan falls into the respond and recover category. So we're offering that free to anybody who might be interested. And we'll go through and do a cyber health evaluation for you and kind of point you kind of to where you're at. So by joining this webinar, that's free to everyone who attended, which I think brings us to our next polling question. Are you interested in getting a free no obligation SensCy score? If so, or if not, either way, please answer. And I'll give everyone a few minutes to do that. And I'll, while everybody's doing that, Reagan, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment, but the Q&A and the chat are both open if anyone has any questions.
I knew I went through that very quickly. I really did want to leave some time for questions. Normally it's a solid 30-minute presentation. So I hope it gave you sort of some food for thought. We don't necessarily think about these things. And I would say that particularly during a crisis, at my previous life, I ran Cyber Command for the state of Michigan through the state police. And there were incidents, and the last thing you want to happen is for an incident to happen and for you to be unprepared and trying to scramble and do all of these things at the same time, right? So hopefully that's your takeaway from this webinar is, hey, if we do a little bit of planning in advance, it'll really help us get through this incident faster and recover faster, and also save us, a significant amount of money.
We do have a question that just came in the chat. The question is, do you have any horror stories from working at the Michigan State Police?
Well, I can tell you that there was a time when Anonymous, I don't know if you're all familiar with the hacking group Anonymous, but there was a time when that group decided they were going to target the state of Michigan. And of course, these things always happen after hours, right? So it's never like Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 p.m. I think it started on a Friday afternoon. They released a video saying they were going to target us. And what they did was what's called a DDoS attack. So there was flooding all of the state's websites with the significant amount of traffic and knocking them down. And if you think about all the different functions of the state of Michigan, right? There's a lot of citizens that are, trying to access those systems. We did a good job of throtting them off. I think this went on for about 6 or 7 days. And I think we had a total of maybe 15 or 20 minutes of downtime. But, we had huge IT staffs, right? We had an actual cyber command center. We had state police personnel, National Guard personnel, Department of Technology personnel, all hands on deck, thwarting off this attack. So we were lucky that we had that. In my private sector days, I've also had some experience where it wasn't that great because there weren't a lot of resources to assist, and maybe we didn't have the right plans in place to make this recovery happen quickly.
That's really interesting. I can't believe that Anonymous targeted you guys. That's crazy.
Yeah, when you see the video and you first look at it, you're like, oh boy.
That's wild. That's wild. We have one more question about your time at the state police. What was the cyber incident response plan like for the state of Michigan like?
Yeah, you can actually find it actually online if you look for it. One thing I'll say about Michigan is Michigan really was the first state to have a fully functioning cyber command center. So what does that mean? That means not only do we have a operations center designed to protect the state's network, but through the State Police Intelligence Center, we were responding out in the early days of cyber to help people get back up and running. This is before there were a lot of forensics companies out there to do that work, because we had forensic examiners that have been examining computer crimes for years, right? So we would send those folks out, and our mission was to bring back the data, anonymize it, and share it with our critical infrastructure partners, right? So our critical infrastructure partners knew, how are these attacks happening? What security measures do we need to shore up, and so forth. And we were actually the first state to have a cybersecurity incident response plan. So Michigan was really the national model. And if you search like the National Governors Association, you'll see the Michigan model is what they actually call their cyber incident response planning package that they offer out to other states. So very similar, right? We had people assigned into roles. We reviewed it every 6 months. We made sure that, that we had notification templates and things like that ready to go, and so on.
That's really impressive. We're really lucky to have you and to have you here to answer our questions. We have one more question in the chat. It seems to be a follow-up to the anonymous attacks that we were talking about the attacks on the state of Michigan. The question is, were the attacks limited to website crashing, or was it other nefarious acts?
We didn't experience, they weren't able to, they threatened a lot of different things, right? But at the end of the day, the only thing that they were successful at was really flooding all of the different state websites with a lot of traffic, and having us have to continuously put more compute power to keeping those things up and running, and so that they didn't go down. They did threaten other actions, but they weren't able to do anything else. They did also start to send out a bunch of, we got flooded with a lot of, they were trying to get through our email security with a lot of phishing attempts, and a lot of those got blocked, some of them didn't. But part of the incident response plan is we immediately alerted all employees like, hey, take a look at this video. They published it publicly on YouTube. Please be extra vigilant and looking out for phishing emails and other things like that. So we were able to communicate that early when we activated the plan, which hopefully helped with that. All right, I think we're right up against the time. I'm happy there were some questions. I know I rushed through this. However, it will be available on our website for you if you want to revisit it and watch it a little bit slower, because I know I was talking quite quickly. And I appreciate everyone joining us today, and thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Dave.